Hello and welcome to our journey tonight. This story explores the landscape between what we want and what we need, the maps we draw for our lives, and what happens when we finally find where we truly belong. Let yourself be swept away as we journey through both familiar and unfamiliar territories. In a tower that stood at the convergence of 7 rivers, and a room filled with maps of places that had never existed, there lived a cartographer named Josephine Moss. She was 41 years old, and she had spent the last 20 years drawing maps of other people's dreams. The process was intricate. People would come to her tower carrying their desires, their ambitions, their visions of the lives they wanted to live. Josephine would listen, her pen moving across parchment, translating their words into geography, mountains of achievement, rivers of creativity, forests of family, cities of success, islands of peace. Each map was unique, detailed, beautiful. Josephine rendered them with exquisite precision. The topography of aspiration, the coastlines of hope, the roads that led from here to there, from who they were to who they wanted to become. And people loved her maps. They would leave her tower clutching these cartographic visions of their ideal lives, energized, inspired, ready to begin the journey. But Josephine had noticed something troubling over the years. People rarely returned to tell her they'd reached their destinations. In fact, when she did see former clients by chance in the market or the street, they often looked lost, still searching, still wandering. The maps hadn't helped them find their way. At first, Josephine blamed herself. Perhaps her cartography wasn't accurate enough. Perhaps she'd misunderstood their desires. She refined her technique, asked more questions, drew with even greater precision, but the pattern continued. Beautiful maps, lost people, and then there was Josephine's own map, the one she'd drawn for herself 20 years ago when she'd first taken up this profession. She kept it in a drawer in her desk, rarely looking at it anymore. The map showed a life she'd wanted, marriage to a fellow artist, children, a cottage by the sea where she could paint and draw in peaceful solitude, surrounded by family, connected to a small community of friends. None of it had happened. She'd never married, never had children. She lived alone in her tower, surrounded by other people's dreams, her own gathering dust. On the morning our story truly begins, Josephine pulled out her old map and spread it on her desk. She traced the routes she'd drawn, the landmarks she'd sketched, the cottage of contentment, the garden of children's laughter, the harbor of deep connection. She had reached none of these places. 20 years of walking, and she was nowhere near the destinations she'd charted. The realization settled over her like morning fog. Perhaps the problem wasn't the precision of the maps. Perhaps it was the maps themselves. That afternoon, a young woman climbed the stairs to Josephine's tower. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes that held a Peculiar quality, neither sad nor happy, just quiet, observant. Josephine prepared her materials as she always did. Fresh parchment, her finest inks, her collection of pens, each one suited to different terrains. "Tell me what you want," Josephine said, her standard opening. "Describe your ideal life. I'll map it for you." The young woman sat in the chair across from Josephine's desk. She was silent for a long moment, looking out the window at the 7 rivers converging far below. "I don't know what I want," she finally said. Josephine blinked. In 20 years, no one had ever said this. Everyone wanted something. Everyone had dreams to map. "Everyone wants something," Josephine said gently. "Perhaps you haven't articulated it yet. Let me help. Do you want success, love, adventure, security, purpose?" "I don't know," the woman repeated. "I've tried wanting all those things. I've followed maps before, not yours, but similar ones. Maps drawn by parents, by teachers, by society. Go to university, get a good job, find a partner, buy a house, build a career. I've tried to want these things. I've tried to travel toward them, but..." She trailed off, searching for words. "But nothing felt right. Every destination I reached felt empty. Every achievement felt hollow. I kept thinking maybe I was on the wrong map, so I'd find a new one, a different definition of success, a different version of the good life. But the emptiness followed me." The young woman looked directly at Josephine. "So I stopped following maps. I stopped trying to want things. And now I'm here. Because I heard you're the best cartographer in the realm, and I wanted to ask you, what do you do when you don't know where you want to go?" Josephine sat very still. The question lodged in her chest like an arrow, because she didn't have an answer. She'd spent 20 years helping people map destinations, without ever questioning whether those destinations were the right ones. "What's your name?" Josephine asked. "River," the young woman said. "River," Josephine repeated. She looked down at her blank parchment, at her collection of pens. "I don't know how to map not knowing. Maybe that's okay," River said. "Maybe not every question needs an answer." River left without a map. Josephine watched from her tower window as the young woman walked away, crossing the bridge over the nearest river, disappearing into the city beyond. And Josephine couldn't stop thinking about her, about the question she'd asked, about the truth in her words that every destination had felt empty, every achievement hollow. That night, Josephine took out her own map again. She stared at it for hours, the cottage of contentment, the garden of children's laughter, the harbor of deep connection. These had been her wants at 21, articulated clearly, mapped precisely. But had they ever truly been hers? Or had they been inherited desires, absorbed from books and movies and cultural expectations of what a good life should look like? She honestly didn't know anymore. The next morning, Josephine did something she hadn't done in 2 decades. She left her tower. She hung a sign on the door. gone exploring, return uncertain, and she began to walk, not toward any destination, not following any route, just walking, letting her feet choose the direction, letting her attention settle on whatever arose. The city in the early morning was beautiful in ways she'd forgotten. The light on the river, the sound of merchants setting up their stalls, the smell of bread baking, the faces of strangers, each absorbed in their own journeys. Josephine walked without purpose, without direction, without a map, and it was terrifying. Every fiber of her being wanted to impose structure, wanted to decide on a destination and plot a route. Her mind kept trying to make this walk meaningful, to turn it into a quest with a clear objective. But she resisted. She let herself simply walk. Hours passed. The city gave way to countryside, fields and farms, small villages. Josephine kept walking, spending nights in roadside inns, waking each morning and choosing a direction based on nothing but intuition or whim. On the third day, she realized something. Without a map, without a destination, she was noticing things she'd never noticed before. The way light filtered through leaves, the sound of a stream, the taste of fresh bread, the kindness of a farmer who offered her water. These weren't landmarks on any map she'd ever drawn. They weren't achievements or milestones. They were just moments, experiences, life as it was actually being lived, rather than as it was being pursued. On the seventh day of walking, Josephine came to a valley she'd never seen before. Though she thought she knew all the geography within 100 miles of her tower, the valley was lush and green, with a small village nestled between hills. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children played in a stream. People tended gardens. Everything moved at a pace that felt unhurried, natural, right. Josephine entered the village. An elderly woman sitting outside a cottage looked up and smiled. "You look lost," the woman said. "I am," Josephine admitted, "though I'm not sure that's a bad thing anymore." The woman's smile deepened. "Come, sit, rest." Josephine sat on the bench beside the woman. They didn't speak for a while, just watched the village life unfold before them. A man repairing a fence, a woman hanging laundry, children chasing a dog. "What is this place?" Josephine finally asked. "The Valley of Presence," the woman said. "Though it's not marked on any map, it can't be. You can only find it when you stop looking for it." Josephine understood immediately. This valley existed in the space between destinations, in the gap between wanting and having. It was a place you could only discover by being lost. "How long have you lived here?" Josephine asked. "Most of my life now," the woman said. "But I didn't find it until I was your age. I spent decades chasing destinations. Success, wealth, status, love. I found some of them, lost some of them, and eventually realized that the chasing was the problem, that I was always living in the future, in the place I was trying to reach, never in the place where I actually was." She gestured around the valley. "Here, we practice presence. We tend what's in front of us. We notice what's actually happening rather than what we wish was happening or fear might happen. It's simple. Not easy, but simple. Josephine stayed in the valley for 3 weeks. The villagers welcomed her without question. She helped in gardens. She learned to tend bees. She spent long afternoons sitting by the stream, just listening to water over stones. And slowly, something in her began to shift. The constant future orientation of her mind, the endless planning and mapping and strategizing began to quiet. She started to experience moments as they actually were rather than as steps towards something else. She ate bread and tasted it. She walked and felt her feet on the earth. She talked with people and actually heard what they said rather than planning her response. It was like learning to see for the first time, or perhaps like remembering how to see the way she'd seen as a child before maps and destinations and the tyranny of wanting. One evening, Josephine sat with the elderly woman, whose name was Margaret, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and rose. "I was a cartographer," Josephine said. "I drew maps of people's dreams, but the maps never helped them arrive anywhere real. And my own map, I never reached any of the places I'd charted for myself." Margaret nodded. "Maps are useful for terrain, for physical geography, but life isn't terrain. It's not a landscape to be crossed. It's an experience to be had." She picked up a stone from beside the bench, turned it over in her weathered hands. When you map a desired future, you're living an imagination. You're relating to a fiction, a story about how things should be, and that story blinds you to how things actually are. You miss the valley because you're looking for the mountain. You miss the stream because you're searching for the ocean. Josephine felt tears prickling her eyes. 20 years of work, 20 years of helping people imagine better lives. Had it all been counterproductive? "It's not that desires are wrong," Margaret continued, as if reading her thoughts, "but there are 2 kinds of desire. There's the desire that pulls you away from the present, that makes you feel like here and now isn't enough. That's the painful kind. That's the kind that keeps you always seeking, never finding." "And the other kind?" Josephine asked. "The desire that emerges from presence, from being fully in your life and noticing what naturally wants to grow. Like a plant reaching toward light, it's not rejecting where it is. It's just responding to what's real. That kind of desire doesn't require maps. It requires attention." Margaret set down the stone. "Your map showed a cottage by the sea, didn't it? Children? A creative life?" Josephine nodded, startled. "How did you know?" "Because that's what we're taught to want. The cultural map. But if you'd been present in your life these 20 years, really present, you might have noticed different desires emerging, quieter ones, more specific to who you actually are rather than who you're supposed to be." "Like what?" Josephine asked. "I don't know," Margaret said. "Only you can discover that, but I'd guess they're simpler than cottage and children. Maybe something like the desire to draw beauty, the desire for quiet mornings, the desire for meaningful work, the desire for connection, not necessarily in the form of family, but in whatever form it naturally takes for you. Josephine sat with this and realized Margaret was right. Her actual lived desires, the ones that had emerged from presence rather than imagination, were simpler. She loved drawing. She loved the quiet of her tower. She loved the work of translating abstract wants into visual form, even if the maps themselves were flawed. What if she'd spent 20 years not failing to reach her destination, but missing the fact that she was already living a life that held what she actually needed? Josephine stayed in the valley for 2 more weeks. Then, one morning, she knew it was time to return to her tower, not because she'd completed some quest or reached some destination, just because it felt right, because the tower was calling her back. She said goodbye to Margaret and the other villagers. They embraced her warmly, but without clinging. People came and went from the valley. That was natural. That was right. The walk back took a week. Josephine traveled slowly, without hurry, noticing everything. The landscape she'd crossed while lost in thought on the way out revealed itself in extraordinary detail on the return. When she finally climbed the stairs to her tower room, it felt both familiar and new. Her desk, her pens, her stacks of parchment, her collection of maps rolled and stored on shelves. But she saw it all differently now. This room wasn't a prison or a failure. It was simply where she lived, where she worked, what was actually real. Josephine sat at her desk and pulled out fresh parchment. She began to draw, but not a map of someone's desired future. Instead, she drew what was: the tower, the 7 rivers, the city spreading out below, the countryside beyond, the hidden valley. She drew the actual geography of her life as it was, not as she wished it to be. And as she drew, she felt a peace she'd never experienced while mapping dreams. This was real. This was present. This was enough. When Josephine reopened her tower for visitors, she hung a new sign: Cartographer of What Is. The first client to climb her stairs was confused. "I don't want a map of what is," the man said. "I know what is. I want a map of what could be, of where I want to go." "I understand," Josephine said gently. "I used to draw those maps. But I've learned something. Those maps don't help. They keep you living in imagination, in the future, always seeking something other than what you have." She gestured to her new work maps of actual places, rendered with loving detail. "What I offer now is different. I map where you actually are, the real geography of your life, your actual relationships, your true desires, not the ones you think you should have, the resources you actually possess, the terrain you're actually crossing." "What's the point of that?" the man asked, frustrated. "Presence," Josephine said. "Clarity. The ability to see what's real. Most people are so busy looking toward imagined futures that they never actually see where they are, and You can't make wise choices about direction if you don't know your starting point. The man left without commissioning a map. So did many others in those first weeks. People wanted visions of better futures, not reflections of present reality. But some stayed, some understood. Some sat with Josephine and told her not about their dreams, but about their actual lives, their real relationships, their genuine daily experiences. And Josephine drew. She mapped the geography of a woman's grief after her mother's death. She charted the terrain of a young man's confusion about his career. She rendered the landscape of an elderly couple's long marriage with all its mountains and valleys, rivers and deserts. These maps were different from her old work. They didn't inspire in the conventional sense. They didn't promise transformation or achievement, but they offered something more valuable: recognition, truth, the gift of being seen clearly. And people who received these maps often wept because someone had finally witnessed them as they actually were, not as they should be or could be or might become. The work was slower now, harder in some ways, but infinitely more satisfying. 6 months after Josephine had reopened her practice, River climbed the tower stairs. Again, Josephine looked up from her desk, surprised and pleased. "You came back." "I did," River said. "I heard you changed your work, that you map what is now instead of what might be." "I do," Josephine confirmed. "Your question about what to do when you don't know, where you want to go, it changed everything for me." River smiled. "I'm glad. And I came back because I think I'm ready now. I don't know where I want to go, but I'd like to know where I am." Josephine prepared her materials, and for the next 3 hours River talked, not about dreams or ambitions or visions of an ideal future, just about her life as it actually was. She worked as a baker. She lived in a small apartment above the bakery. She had a cat. She had friends she met for tea on Sundays. She liked walking by the river in the mornings. She felt neither happy nor unhappy, just present, alive, here. Josephine drew as River talked. She rendered River's life in careful detail: the bakery, the apartment, the cat, the walking routes, the tea shop, the friends. When she finished, she turned the map to face River. River looked at it for a long time, her eyes filling with tears. "It's not much," she said softly. "Isn't it?" Josephine asked. "You have meaningful work that serves your community. You have shelter and companionship. You have routines that nourish you. You have friends. You have a life that's actually being lived, not imagined or pursued." River traced the lines of the map with her finger. "You're right. It's not much. It's everything." She looked up at Josephine. "Thank you. Thank you," Josephine replied. "You saved me from a lifetime of mapping mirages. We spend so much time imagining where we want to be that we never fully arrive where we are. We draw maps of ideal futures, the career we should have, the relationship we deserve, the person we're supposed to become, and those maps pull us forward. always forward into a tomorrow that never quite arrives. But what if the point isn't to arrive somewhere else? What if the point is to fully inhabit where you already are? Your life right now as it actually is, with all its imperfections and ordinariness, contains everything you need. Not everything you want, perhaps. Not everything you've been told you should have. But everything you actually need to be present, to be alive, to experience this one precious life you've been given. The cottage by the sea is just a cottage. The perfect career is just work. The ideal relationship is just two humans stumbling through life together. Nothing is as magical as we imagine it will be, and nothing needs to be, because the magic isn't in the destination, it's in the presence, in the noticing, in the being fully here, fully now, fully in the life you're actually living. Let go of the maps for tonight. Let go of where you think you should be. Let go of all the imagined futures pulling you away from this moment. Just be here, now, in this bed, in this darkness, in this breath. This is where you are, and it's enough. More than enough. It's everything. Rest here. Be present with this moment of sleep approaching. Let go of destinations. Let go of achievements. Let go of all the places you're trying to reach. Just arrive here, now, fully, and rest.